are, that's perfect.
Thank you for that reminder. Sorry.
Are also available online. So if you missed our 2021 series, you can get caught up. And at some point in the session, I'll post the link in the chat box so you can check those out. So without further ado, I'm really happy. This is a gender and disaster risk reduction is something that is very close, near and dear to my heart. So I'm super excited that you've joined us today to look at this topic. And I'm pleased to introduce Alex Valoroso, who's going to be presenting today. So let me just say a few words of introduction about her. Alex is an experienced gender equity advisor and is currently supporting the implementation of GenderBased Analysis Plus, GBA Plus, within the province of British Columbia. She has extensive practitioner experience in emergency management throughout BC and in Canada, and has previously worked with EMBC, Emergency Management BC, CUSO International, Doctors Without Borders, and the Canadian Red Cross. Welcome, Alex. As a principal consultant at Valoroso Consulting, she is currently working on several projects, including research on COVID-19 and gender-based violence, and is developing training to address sexual exploitation and abuse within domestic emergency management. Alex sits on the board of the Canadian Journal of Emergency Management and volunteers as the vice president of her local Women's Resource Center. With an MA in disaster and emergency management and specialized certificates in gender, intersectional analysis, and addressing gender-based violence in emergencies, Alex is passionate about working in community and taking an intersectional feminist approach to her work. So just as a side note, before I pass it over to Alex, one of the personal things that I love about this project is that I get to reach out to people who I've greatly admired their work, and Alex is one of them. I've seen her on the speaker circuit at many conferences and really admired her passion and enthusiasm to this very important but not well understood topic. So it's such a pleasure, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was really kind of you. And thank you, Shauna and Fuse Social, for helping to co-host this session. I'm really excited to have you join me today. And so I'm going to hope that technology is working with me. And I'm just going to share my screen for the presentation. I just want to make sure everybody can see that.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to do that. And as Sarah was saying, please feel free to raise your hand, to unmute, to participate in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that as best as possible. But Sarah, feel free to jump in if I've missed something. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And again, thank you for joining me over this next hour and a little bit. And let's talk a little bit about gender and GBA Plus and disaster risk reduction. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I am calling in as a guest on the traditional territory of the Latako Dene, and to acknowledge the Dekalb peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. So there's quite a bit of information, and I tried to select what would be most helpful for folks wanting to learn more about gender and disaster risk reduction and some of the basics around GBA+. While we do have time at the end of this session for questions, like I said, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or use the chat function. I also have a couple of mini breaks throughout the session to see if there are any questions or comments. And as always, I like to start off sessions with an invitation to leave your stress or worries at the door and to allow this time for learning and reflection. So let's get started. So we know that language used around diversity, equality, and inclusion continues to evolve. So you probably are most likely familiar with these terms, but I always like to have a quick review to make sure that we're all on the same page. So this list is not exhaustive that we're going to go through, but I encourage everyone to access the recently released glossary of terms from the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. It actually just came out in the beginning of January, and I've included the link in the reference section as well as in the tools and resources. So sex or biological sex is the medical term based on physical characteristics and anatomy used to designate people as male, female, or intersex. Biological sex is distinct from gender or gender identity. Gender is the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of women, girls, men, boys, and gender diverse people. You may also hear the term non-binary folks. Gender is often used interchangeably, but incorrectly with women, so gender does not mean women. Gender and sex are very distinct from each other. Gender roles are the social and cultural expectations placed on an individual based on their sex assigned at birth. Gender roles can also vary greatly within different cultures. So what maybe is applicable in a North American context or within a community doesn't always translate to other regions. So patriarchy is the societal structures that exist where men and boys hold the majority of the power and control, and masculinity and maleness are perceived as superior. So we have marginalized, vulnerable, or underrepresented people or groups. You may also hear the terms equity-seeking groups or equity-deserving groups instead. This speaks to groups of people who have been historically disadvantaged and underrepresented. These groups include, but not limited to, the 4 designated groups in Canada, which are women, visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, and people with disabilities. We can also think of other groups such as people in the LGBTQ+ community, people with diverse gender identities and sexual orientations. We also have BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's an alternative term for visible minority used to identify non-white racial and ethnic groups. So it's just important to name the specific group or groups you're referring to or working with rather than using a catch-all unless the initiative is very broad-based and not specific to one group. People have most likely come across a variation of this image. Equality is where everyone is treated the same regardless of individual diversity and needs. Equality sounds good in theory, but in practice, many underrepresented groups are further marginalized by this concept of equal treatment. Equity is where everyone is treated according to their diverse needs in a way that enables all people to participate, perform, and engage to the same extent. So diversity is about the individual. It's about the variety of unique dimensions, qualities, and characteristics we all possess, and the mix that occurs in any group of people. Race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, economic status, physical abilities, life experience, and other perspectives can make up individual diversity. We don't want to use diversity as a code word for underrepresented groups or to mean a specific group of people. Inclusion is creating a culture that embraces, respects, accepts, and values diversity. It is a mindful and equitable effort to meet individual needs so everyone feels valued, respected, and able to contribute to their fullest potential. So you can have a diverse workforce, but if people don't feel respected and valued, you don't have an inclusive workplace. So intersectionality or intersectional is a term coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw to describe how social identities may overlap to create compounding barriers for individuals. It is described as a framework for approaching issues from multiple perspectives and understanding how multiple groups or individuals with multiple identities may be affected. This differs from diversity in that intersectionality considers compounding barriers for individuals and the systems in place that create oppression, exclusion, or inclusion. Then we come to Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus. It's a process promoted by the Government of Canada. It is an analytical process that helps us understand who benefits and who is excluded from programs, policies, or services. It looks at how multiple identities intersect and interact in ways that can intensify inclusion or exclusion. The plus indicates that the analysis does go beyond gender and includes the examination of a range of other identity factors. So for example, indigeneity, age, education, ability, and so on. You can see here it's closely linked to intersectionality and why that's the case. It's also called intersectional analysis, and we'll dig deeper into GBA Plus a little bit later in this session. So here we're just reiterating the relationship between GBA Plus and diversity and inclusion. They're closely related and it's part of the same equation. So there's a relationship or partnership to DEI because through an intersectional analysis, Recommendations and actions are developed and applied to ensure initiatives are equitable, inclusive, and accessible in a meaningful way. So I'm just going to pause there and see if there are any questions around terminology or people feel pretty comfortable with that. There won't be a test or anything. I just want to see if people feel pretty good. Yes, I'm getting things up. Awesome. Okay, so what is disaster risk reduction? In our next section, we'll just briefly touch on this for folks who maybe haven't really delved into DRR in a lot of depth. And I won't either. It's just like a brief overview. So disaster risk reduction, or DRR, advocates for the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is a successor to the Hyogo Framework for Action. The Sendai Framework was the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda and provides member states with concrete actions to protect development gains from the risk of disaster. So there are 7 global targets, 13 guiding principles, and 4 key priorities for action. So here's part of the guiding principles, and really this is just to reiterate the importance of having an all of society and inclusive approach for disaster risk reduction. Just give people a second to read that. So specifically mentioned in the guiding principles is the intersectional approach to disaster risk reduction, whereby gender, age, disability, and cultural perspectives should be integrated in all policies and practices, and women and youth leadership should be promoted. Sendai also recommends seeking input from underrepresented groups on the collaboration of the design of policies, plans, and mechanisms, including for early warning. The last 2 groups are bolded, as although they aren't included in the original list, these groups are important for developing inclusive disaster risk reduction strategies. We should also be considering how lower socioeconomic status plays out in DRR. And so Sendai identifies gender as a cross-cutting principle in disaster risk reduction, and research shows that having effective diversity and inclusion within emergency management and supporting agencies can improve their internal performance and contribute to organizational community capacities to manage disaster risk reduction and resilience building. So as we know, gender is socially constructed, therefore social life is organized around gender relations or gender roles. This means that there's a gender dimension to any social event, especially as one as significant as a disaster. Women, girls, men, boys, and gender diverse folks have different needs, capabilities, and constraints. Emergencies have different impacts on different people and often change the dynamics within a household. Additionally, disasters and emergencies tend to exacerbate existing vulnerabilities. So the objective is to assist all groups, not just the advantaged, during the disaster cycle and phases of disaster management. If we can identify and mitigate against some of these vulnerabilities, we can substantially reduce the risk and damage from disasters. And so the focus has been on women and girls due to inequitable power structures and the patriarchal system common across much of the world. Patriarchy disadvantages women, girls, and gender diverse folks, but also creates harm for men and boys. Gender inequity is at the root of institutionalized systemic and structural barriers and drives the lower status that society places on women and girls. This also accounts for the shocking levels of gender-based violence often seen during and in the aftermath of disasters. The Sendai Framework specifically states that women and their participation are crucial to effectively managing disaster risk and designing, resourcing, and implementing disaster risk reduction policies, plans, and programs is central. It also states that adequate capacity building measures need to be taken to empower women for preparedness, as well as to build their capacity to secure alternate means of livelihood in post-disaster situations. So gender is not the only consideration, however, it's often the main entry point because of the way that society is currently centered around gender roles. So we do need to take an intersectional lens to acknowledge the differences between groups and within groups. Of course, not all women are the same, not all men are the same, no particular group is the same. So it's really important to understand those differences as part of a D&I strategy. And participants with emergency management need to have diverse perspectives and experiences to meaningfully address disaster risk reduction. So while conducting research on the lack of gender awareness and disaster management programming within a domestic context, while I was conducting research, I recognized that there was a lack of this gendered lens within domestic emergency management. And so interviewing professionals from various sectors identified that there was a big gap and presented as a list of themes pulled from additional research on gender and disaster. So I won't go through the entire list, but it's presented here to highlight the various factors and complexities which exist during disasters. I will note a few pieces though. The burden of childcare, dependent care, elder care tends to fall on women, and we see this very clearly with COVID. As practitioners, we might ask, how can women and girls' roles as caregivers and family caretakers be useful in emergency management preparedness and recovery? Research has also shown that during and after disasters, women located in parts of the world, such as North America, are at greater risk of economic insecurity, domestic conflict, and increased workload. And the research is focused more around, I would say, North America and similar sized countries or similar sized economies like New Zealand, Australia, and Western Europe. A major concern is the increase in violence, of course, against women and girls post and during disasters. Unfortunately, this is a common characteristic regardless of geography. There was a 400% increase in violence against women after Hurricane Katrina and 53% increase in family violence after the New Zealand earthquake in 2010. COVID has also been called the shadow pandemic for its levels of gender-based violence, which has seen an increase around the world. The recommendation is, of course, for all levels of government to integrate gender-based violence into emergency guidelines and prioritize this in recovery from events. Indigenous women and women of color face even greater disparities and greater risk due to historical legacy of colonialism and ingrained inequities. So again, it's understanding those differences between groups and within groups. When we look at situational vulnerability, we see that women during reproductive years tend to rely more heavily on healthcare services, making them more vulnerable and at risk to disasters. And they tend to face vulnerabilities, men tend to face vulnerabilities during times of unemployment, illness, divorce, and so on, due to a lack of strong social networks or social capacity. So how do we account for this and ensure supports are in place to address these issues? So again, it's understanding how people are impacted and in what ways. Gender norms also put men and boys at risk, as norms tend to shame men from accessing mental health and illness supports, and they encourage risk-taking behaviors. So post-disaster recovery projects also predominantly involve men, while women employed in low-status jobs, especially women of color, or those already living in poor socioeconomic conditions, don't have as many opportunities. And although women's needs tend to differ from men's needs, we also want to resist stereotyping. So again, there are differences between groups and within groups, and we really want to understand who is being impacted, how they're being impacted, and why. And I think that some of the new research around COVID is going to really highlight some of these pieces. And again, these themes highlight the need for gender-based mechanisms to be integrated into disaster and emergency management. And so the current practice in disaster management in North America tends to focus on practical needs. So practical needs can be defined as immediate necessities. So water, shelter, food, income, and healthcare within a specific context. These are often thought of as like the operational aspects. Strategic interests, on the other hand, refer to the relative status of women, girls, men, boys, and gender diverse folks within society. So if we're to provide equitable services, we must take a transformative shift from mostly practical needs to strategic needs. So transformative change addresses the root cause of inequity and moves beyond those practical needs to strategic needs. So you know that decision-making, power, control over resources, status, societal constructs, and meaningfully works towards the goals set out by the Sendai framework. So I'm going to take another pause and just see how folks are doing, if there's any questions or comments at this point. I know it's a lot of information, so just wanted to check in. Looks like folks are doing good. I'm just going to scroll through the participant list. Okay, excellent. So next, we're going to delve into GBA+. And again, this is a process you can use to take an intersectional lens around disaster risk reduction. And so folks can maybe type in the chat or share where you would rate your understanding of GBA Plus. That would just help me give me a sense of where we're at. Perhaps this isn't a term you're familiar with, or it's something you've heard, but you're not sure what it does, or maybe you've been actively engaging this process, whether you call it GBA Plus or intersectional analysis. You know, don't be shy. This is all about learning and sharing. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes there, or pardon me, moments. Give my chat box. 2 to 3, 2 to 3, 1, 2. Anyone else? Or kind of looks like we're in a bit of a sort of the mid range. 2. And I'm sure as we go through this, you'll probably identify pieces that you're already doing, but maybe you're just not using the same language. So don't feel discouraged. You know your community, you know the work that you're doing, and this is just a way to kind of help pull all these pieces together. So thank you for sharing. So Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus, is a process, again, like I said, promoted by the Government of Canada. Outside of Canada, you'll most likely hear it or see it as intersectional analysis, gender-based analysis, or gender equity and social inclusion. It's an analytical process that helps us understand who benefits and who is excluded from programs, policies, or services. So right away, we can see how this would be beneficial to disaster management and all the supporting agencies and partners. As mentioned earlier, the plus indicates that analysis goes beyond gender and includes examination of a range of other identity factors, so indigeneity, age, education, and so on. Again, examines the relational differences between groups and within groups, and looks at how multiple identities intersect and interact in ways that can intensify inclusion or exclusion. So it's used to identify the broad positive and negative effects of a designated project, policy, or service, and to ensure equity of outcomes. And we want to use this across all business or service areas. We use this at the onset of initiative and throughout its life cycle. And there are many ways to apply GBA Plus. However, there are a series of recommended steps. But before we get into the steps of GBA Plus, I do want to acknowledge what makes GBA Plus tricky. It's not simply additive, so it's not like gender plus youth plus other social identity factors, but rather compounded. GBA Plus requires an analysis that's grounded in a specific historical and spatial context. It's an analysis for specific project or service in one region, an analysis in a specific region or context or project won't necessarily bring you the same results in another region with the same project unless it's included in the initial stage of the analysis. So it's really not a one size fits all. It also grapples with complex relationships and interactions within the structures of oppression and the reactions to these structures. So it's really systems based. I also think it's important to distinguish between an assessment and an analysis. I think what we tend to see is more of an assessment rather than actual analysis. There's a place for both depending on what you're working on and the social context you're in. For example, updating a manual may only require an assessment unless it's a highly outdated and clearly does not take into consideration the dynamics of the targeted community. Often we're pressed for time in emergency situations. When it comes to disaster risk reduction, the standard should be to conduct analysis, but sometimes an assessment is all that's available. And it's a starting point for sure. Okay, so now we're at the basic steps to GBA Plus. There are also different types of methodology, but these are the general steps, and this format helps to walk you through the process. Steps are also fluid and may overlap, and I have to say that really in-depth GBA Plus training will take more time than we have today, but this should be enough to help you get started and to begin to look at how to make your programs and services inclusive from an intersectional lens. So the basic steps are, identifying the purpose, collecting the information needed, so your consultation, your research, your data, conducting the analysis or assessment if suitable. Not all initiatives will require an in-depth analysis, but questions should be asked to better understand the context or environment that you're working in. Developing recommendations and action items, implementation. So this step is integral to the process because if you don't implement anything, there isn't any change actually taking place. And monitoring and evaluation. So checking in often, feedback and adjusting as needed. On a side note, while you may not be following the same process or the same language. I've noticed that organizations are incorporating elements of GBA Plus or honing in on D&I. So as you go through this, please think of which elements you may already be doing. And so I tried to provide an example which would speak to the majority of the folks here. I often use engagement strategies or developing or updating a manual as examples which are relatable and can help you and can help bridge the process of GBA Plus to something you will most likely see or do in your work. If you would like to see a different example, please feel free to note that in the chat or send me a message afterwards as I strive to keep this content relevant for folks. So first we have identifying the overall outcome. So the example is, solicit input from XX stakeholder or partner group to better inform policy options or service delivery on XYZ. This could be an after action report. It could be gathering input for a shelter or group lodging, developing a community plan, and so on. And you always want to work with community instead of making assumptions. And so identifying the overall outcome is what you hope to achieve. You want to understand what your purpose is, understand what you are trying to address, better understand the context you're working in, and be aware of what impacts might be intended or unintended through your work, and ensuring you're working in a good way, and any other relevant outcomes. And so for those of you in the social profit, you're probably very familiar with the communities that you work with, but sometimes we hear the loudest voices and we don't always get to those who are not in that space. So it's a really great idea to connect in with one another if you're not already doing that, and just have a better sense of the different groups that are making up your community for whatever project or service you're wanting to initiate. So then you want to review your current initiatives. So what is currently happening? What is being proposed, if that's applicable to your project or service? Consider the needs and desires of a specific group or population or community. Develop a plan to garner input and best meet the needs of the specific group, and identify the assumptions being made. So this could either be by current initiative, maybe there's making assumptions on policy, or even by your team around who would be impacted. And the team should be diverse in its experience and application of the product, program, or service, or you need to seek diverse perspectives to support the work. So as much as we like to think that we're very woke and mindful of all these different perspectives, we don't always have all the variety of lived experience. So we really want to have that diversity of perspective to help support this. Next is collecting the information needed. So this would be like your research and data. So again, know your audience, who is invited, who's been excluded. How can you work to mitigate this? Have there been any previous engagement sessions or recent sessions? How were they received? What was the impact? Being mindful of engagement fatigue, and work with the community liaison if needed. So consider what process will be best suited for engagement based on the needs of the stakeholder or partner. So is this participatory? Is there presentation? Is it virtual, face-to-face? Take into consideration cultural protocol when in community. Also consider potential bias in the community. So for example, when visitors from larger urban centers or sometimes from government go to rural communities, there may be some resistance or hesitancy from partners based on previous experience. Understand and identify who holds the relationship with the stakeholder or partner group, and who is best suited to moderate or facilitate discussion to encourage open dialogue, maintain trust, and to demonstrate an inclusive environment. There are also practical considerations for face-to-face sessions aside from safety issues with COVID. In-person meetings depend on the anticipated size of the meeting, time of day, weather factors, utilizing a neutral location or location of preference for the community or organization. There should be a focus on cultural and psychological safety. So for example, being mindful of colonial trauma, and that utilizing a school setting for a meeting or shelter may not be appropriate with Indigenous peoples or Indigenous partners, or using a school bus to transport community members may be triggering or not suitable for elders or those with mobility issues. So of course, you want to make sure transportation is accessible. You want to have a welcoming environment, refreshments, mindful of overly branded government or overly branded by the organization. You want to, again, make sure that transportation is being provided or supported, especially in rural areas. space for children, seating considerations, and mobility access and setup. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a meeting and there isn't seating for elders, or it's not priority seating for folks that have mobility issues. Honorarium, if applicable, again, adhering to protocol and norms within Indigenous communities and partners. And if time allows and if appropriate, send out an accommodation form and inquire about diverse needs. Again, use of the community liaison may be better suited depending on the topic or the group. And with our data, we want to utilize available and relevant sources of information, including previous research, after action reports, government or project papers, field office reports. And this stuff exists. So I think it's a combination of connecting with community and utilizing what you already have. We just want to be mindful that information may be biased. So it's best to get a cross section of sources and just understand what it is that you're looking at. You could also conduct a desk review or a lit review or do an environmental scan and, consider are you using focus groups, surveys, tabletop discussions. Think of how best to capture what's being shared. Use this as an opportunity, of course, to build and maintain relationships. So you want to allow enough time for the session to happen, and you don't want to be in a rush to leave right after. You want to schedule an extra time in case sessions are longer or people want to connect afterwards. I think it's also important not to demand that sessions happen quickly or based on your time schedule, but really consider the needs of your partner group or stakeholder group and ensure that that's a collaborative process. Adhere to privacy standards, ensure that the information collected, insights gained is shared back with communities or the stakeholder or partner group. And you need to invest the time in this piece. I think this is the biggest piece, is sort of that collecting of information and how you're doing it, or else your strategy you use to move forward may not be asking the right questions or may miss those voices and perspectives which need to be included. And of course, some of these considerations can be listed out as part of a checklist to ensure you're going through the process in a thoughtful way. So then we have conducting the analysis or assessment. So review, interpret the data, and this should go beyond just a summary of the event. You want to analyze what it's showing you. So are there emerging themes or gaps, any unanswered questions or new information that's been presented by what you've just captured in your engagement sessions? And then this step feeds into the implementation piece. So engagement is only useful if you do something with the information gathered. So you want to take the information from the engagement session. You want to develop practical activities or recommendations based off of the analysis, which are also specific. So for example, rather than saying support evacuees in regards to mental health and well-being, use the data available to show how evacuees best feel supported when there are a range of services available. So the recommendation would be then to provide culturally appropriate XYZ services at XX location with the support of XY organization. This makes it much easier to understand what is needed and to follow through on action items. Then we have monitoring and evaluation. So engagement sessions can create a baseline and be used for measuring success of proposed implementation initiatives, the services, and so on. It's essential to report out to the stakeholder, partner group, or community where you first did your engagement session. And you also want to apply lessons learned to future strategies. So while you can have a bit of a template, just remember that one size does not fit all. So that was a lot of information, and I'm just gonna take a pause again to see how folks are doing and to see if there's any questions or comments from the audience. Hopefully everyone's still with me.
No, it's been really good, Alex. Thank you. I really liked the insight as well about talking about transportation and how that can be triggering. Like oftentimes, I wouldn't consider that, right? So thank you for that insight.
Great, I'm glad to hear that was helpful. Yeah, and please feel free to make note of any pieces that you'd like to follow up on, or jot any takeaways that you want to share with your team or bring back to your organization. And I'm always happy to connect in afterwards as well. So I'm just going to take a sip here. And so we're just going to look at GBA Plus in your work, and essentially you're finding ways to make your services inclusive by taking an intersection approach to your work and implementing change. It takes practice, but becomes easier the more that you do it. And these are just some examples on this slide here about the ways that you can utilize GBA Plus. And I'm just curious if anybody wants to share some of the work that maybe they've been doing, or if they can relate to any of these pieces around making their services, programs, or projects more inclusive. Thanks for your comment, Jen. Yeah, so I'll just pause here. You know, and if you're not sure if it is or isn't, you know, it's totally fine to ask. I think sometimes we think that if we don't do it perfectly, or, you know, it doesn't matter, but it does. And I think taking some steps are better than maybe not doing any. And just this is hopefully a way to make connections to some of the work that you're doing.
It's, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know how, I'll turn my video on, but I can't see a way of, I guess we just see you, that's okay. Anyways, hello, I'm Guy Choquet. I'm the Recovery Operations Director in Fort McMurray. And last year we had a flood. And it's interesting what happened at the beginning of the flood. It's hard to get information on populations when there's a disaster, especially when there's a disaster where everybody evacuates.
Yeah.
Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you, Guy.
Okay, sorry. So it was interesting. What we did is we invited agencies that were, I'll call them dealing with special populations for lack of a better term, to be part of an exchange. And then eventually we actually created a program where 10 agencies, including school boards, were together. And really was interesting because like what you're saying happened kind of organically. So for example, I just have a few examples to share. Like one example is we had the Multicultural Association as part of our membership. So you kind of wonder, like, what does the Multicultural Association have to do with disasters, right? But what they ended up doing, they did a critical activity of helping to translate information. So we had a boil water advisory here for like over a month and things like that. So by having that agency as part of the collaborative, we're able to reach way more people. And then another example would be just like even the schools, right? So the schools have their populations, but their populations also are kind of related to other agencies. So having the collaborative really allowed, I guess, a forum conversation of allowing the intersectionality to come to fore, right? So I just, and then now, I'll give you another, sorry, I have another example.
No, please go ahead.
Through our work with the Multicultural Association, we actually did outreach, for example, to the Islamic community in Fort McMurray through the mosque. And so we had a presentation, all of the agencies presented what the programs are. And then as a result of that, they've noticed a great increase of access to services from that population. So part of it is like we want to be better prepared for disasters, but also building resiliency in the non-disaster times is so important. So I just really appreciate like your presentation is kind of putting words to what I think I've been witnessing. And so I just want to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And that relationship building is so important. And as social profits working together, you better understand that local context that you're in. And you're right, it's difficult to kind of know where everybody's at and understand the different populations, but by utilizing that social capacity, the social networks there, you have a better sense of who is in the community and what their needs are. And I think that's really important. So again, like there are elements of this happening, even though it might not follow a specific process. And it's really inspiring to hear that there's a focus on the relationship building and understanding the context that you're working in.
Alex, if I could add, it's Sarah. We're noticing that in grant requests, is particularly at the federal level, GVA plus is a requirement now. So it's interesting, like I've been working in Canada now for the last 4 years, and it's becoming more and more prominent. So I think that's really great to see. And also when I was with the provincial government too, that was becoming more and more mainstream. So I quite like that. And what I've enjoyed about your presentation too is that like I've done the training, the federal level training, but it, like to have it kind of broken down as to here's how you actually implement it. Like I get the concepts and ideas, but the way that you presented it helps to kind of just, yeah, just make it more workable, I would say. And that's maybe a gap that still needs to be filled in Canada for how do we actually do this kind of really important work. So just a few comments.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And it's something that we've noted as well around the federal program. I do have that as one of the resources. So if you haven't had an opportunity, there's a link there. But it's been noted as like, how do you know, I get why it's important. I get the like conceptually understand it, but like, how do we actually do it? And I think Government of Canada is struggling a little bit around that. I think the application of GBA Plus hasn't been as seamless as they were hoping for. It's something that was adopted in 2011. And again, it's coming from gender-based analysis, it's coming from international development work. So how it's been translated into sort of the federal provincial levels is still ongoing. I believe the Federation of Canadian Municipalities actually did a call out for a GBA Plus audit last year, the year before. So I have a sense that this is going to trickle down more and more. And again, you may hear it as different things. In Canada, it is sort of the brand is GBA Plus, but I think improvements will continue to happen as we understand the content better. And to be honest, you know, when I was doing my research a few years ago, it was clear that people weren't doing gender-based analysis, even in intersectional analysis. And so it's a skill set that's required. And it's, I hate to say it's not something that you do off the side of your desk. It requires skill, expertise, and time. Oh, my cat's trying to get in here. Just trying to hold her off. So it's something to be mindful of, but don't let that scare you away. Don't let that intimidate you. I think the important part is you learn by doing and starting to like even ask questions, beginning to kind of explore your assumptions and look at the broader structures and systems in place and really look at inequity around services and the way maybe that programs are happening, and especially around service delivery. And it starts to become a bit more intuitive. And as Guy was saying, you kind of end up doing some of the work, even if you're not putting it in this sort of this process that we're calling GBA Plus. I'm just going to check. Okay, so I just have a couple of comments here. So from Jen, my biggest concern is that emergency management protocols and best practices present as quasi-military command and control structures, and so many lived experiences are not considered in institutional structures and constraints, especially with emergency social services. What countries are doing well in this space? Scandinavian countries? Yeah, so we have a problem with disaster and emergency management. It's stemming from sort of the origins of this space, which is, it is quasi-military. And so I think what we need to be doing is, in order to change the way we do our work, we have to look internally and look at who is actually coming in to do the work. So we need to kind of change that to be able to impact sort of the outside process, or when we're working with partners and organizations around disaster and emergency management. And there is a shift taking place. Even 5-6 years ago, when I was talking about gender and disaster, there wasn't a lot of uptake. And so I've seen it increase more and more. I think it's just people becoming more aware of the importance around it. So it's there. I think internationally, it's been happening for a long time. Usually it's tied to development aid. There's been an expectation that you have gender considerations in the work that you're doing. It's tied to climate change. Here in Canada, we just haven't had that. But it's still a struggle. It's very much a struggle for around the world. And I would say that there are certain countries, I would say your European Union is actually doing really well. They have a lot of support and a lot of agencies around that. Scandinavian countries, I think they have elements that they're doing well with GBA Plus. I don't want to stereotype, but I wouldn't say that any country is like the beacon of perfection. I mean, Canada has a international, I always get this wrong, international feminist assistance policy, and that still is problematic in some ways. So I think it's looking at, is there sort of a gender equity and social inclusion policy. What does that look like? What is it addressing, and how is it being implemented? Because it's all well and good to say we're going to do something, but we actually have to do it. We have to, that's the action part that seems to be lacking. And we have lots of research. We know what the challenges are. So it's actually doing the change. And I think this is where we make the change, is at the grassroots levels with organizations that are working on the ground, working in community, working with people. And that helps to shift things. And then as research comes in, that kind of reaches another scale. So it's, it takes time, but there has been a shift. And Sarah, I don't know, I mean, you've been working in this space. So would you agree that you've seen a bit of a shift?
Definitely. And I think it's the inclusion of more, like in Alberta in particular, like if we work with social profits, community-based organizations, or, they get it. And so I think it's like, it's kind of, it's building out, it's widening our partnerships in community. And I think that's helping to amplify the work in gender, because this is something like, if you work in health, for example, this is kind of everyday business. It's not quite so outside of the box than if you're in a fire department, for example. So I think it's the inclusion of social profits in this kind of work that can really help amplify the necessity of this and the importance of it.
Yeah. Great, thanks. And anecdotal, when I was in the province's EMO Ops Center for the CRCs during the wildfire in Wood Buffalo, I was mistaken for bringing food and coffee to the ops leaders. Oh, that, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It's just like, oh, it's, yeah, it's quite gendered in terms of the way women are seen to be participate. I'm assuming that's from Jen. I don't want to make any, I think that was from Jen. But like, yeah, who's doing what work? And so there are impacts, even though if we think, oh, everything is fine, it's not fine, it's not okay. And people's ability to participate that they want in the ways that they want to may be limited because of these gendered roles that we just don't discuss in Canada and North America, because quote unquote gender has been done and it's just not this consideration, when really it's integral. Like I say, it's an entry point. We're not just a gender or our sex, we have other elements to ourselves, but it's a huge it's a main starting point for sure. Right, so Alex, I see that we have, oh, go ahead.
It's Guy here. I just want to make another comment, if you don't mind. Reflecting on all that you presented and all of that, I think one of the biggest challenges is communication. Like, it's barriers to communication, it's language barriers, people don't necessarily have access to technology and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I just really feel like that's the thing that jumps out at me, and then all of the various creative ways of communicating. So I don't know, I just wanted to share that. Like, to me, it's a critical, because then that's your populations, like how do they need to know, right? Otherwise it's just, yeah. So I just want to share that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's important. So I live in a rural community, and probably 10 minutes out in any direction, there's no cell service, there's no high-speed internet. And how many times do we have services that require downloading an online form or joining in on a Zoom call, and they're like, there is no internet and I can't join. So even accessing information is still something that's not really equitable across much of Canada. And we don't always think of it in those terms, depending on the province that you're in, or the geographic location that you're in. And yeah, I think it's awareness building, it's sharing the messaging around it. And I think it's discussing why it's important. I think people get turned off when they hear gender. They think, oh, that's just for women, and it's not about men, it's not about other people. But actually, it's really, we all have gender, and it's really about how to make every services equitable, and so that folks can participate to the best of their ability, and that there is choice and that there is opportunity. So I'm going to move to the next piece here. I'm going to try to move here. There we go. So we'll move into some tools and resources to help you work through some of the pieces that we've discussed. And I recognize that we've got about 5-ish minutes before we kind of get into the Q&A part. So bear with me. I'm going to talk for another 5 minutes. It's a lot of me talking, I apologize. It is a bit text heavy. I think this is really important. So we have a few pillars of inclusion to be applied internally with your teams or as part of your overall service delivery. It's also helpful if you can identify someone in your organization or team to either be the focal point or champion for GBA plus or intersectionality. This content has been adapted from original sources, actually from a sporting website, but I found the main pillars to be so applicable in a number of settings. So I do like to use this as a foundational piece when looking at diversity and inclusion. So Access explores the importance of a welcoming environment and the habits that create it. So this is about what your participants or what your partners or special populations experience when they access your services or organization. It's not only the physical considerations, but it's also about the feel, the environment, the culture that's in place that you're in. So an example could be a reception center where folks are accessing services. It's being promoted as a welcoming environment and has a ramp available for folks to use if they need it. But if the person who greets individuals makes them feel unwelcome, or a volunteer says that they can't help you because you're a person with a disability, then the ramp is really irrelevant. That individual is still not going to participate. Even something, as having change tables in all washrooms, regardless of sex or gender, is important. You want to normalize that practice by, having posters or images outside and inside the space, so all parents are aware that option or caretakers are aware of that option that exists, and they're made to feel comfortable when using the change table. It sounds like really simple, but there are barriers. So it's important to explore what access really means in the physical and non-physical environment. Attitude looks at how willing people are to embrace inclusion and diversity and to take meaningful action. So it's about having a willingness to reflect on what is or what isn't happening and to take real action informed by diverse needs. Choice is about finding out what options people want and how they want to get involved. So this is really about providing opportunities and giving people a choice in how they move forward in their recovery or identify strategies for preparedness. It's about meeting people where they're at and providing options for folks. So you're more likely to get diversity in terms of people involved in these activities when we have choice. And we want to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach and instead work within the parameters that folks have identified. So again, really meeting folks where they're at, community where they're at. Partnerships looks at how individual and organizational relationships are formed and how effective they are. I think Guy, you've spoken to this already as a really great example. And so this is really about relationship building. So while a more formal process could include introductions and meetings and possibly an MOU or contract, informal conversations and connecting with folks is equally important. And I think most of us would agree that disaster management is 90% relationship building. Communications examines the way that we let people know about different options to get involved, how we share that information, and what our organization or team culture is about. And so think about who you're communicating with and also how you're sharing this information. Is it suiting people's communication needs? Are you aware of what's relevant or standard practice for a community, and being diverse in your communication strategy? So for example, again, where I live, Facebook, the local newspaper, and public notice boards are how people get and share information. So this doesn't work in all communities and with all population groups. So again, think about the context you're in and what actually works within that space. Policy considers how an organization commits to and takes responsibility for inclusion. So policy is about holding yourself, your organization, your stakeholders, and your partners to account for inclusion. It's about saying that inclusion is important, but more than that, it's about saying this is how we're going to address it and this is what it means for us, and then having mechanisms to actually deliver on those statements. Again, it's this action-oriented piece that we need to be taking action and making change. And opportunities to explore what options are available for folks from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's similar to choice, but not the same. Opportunities is about what do you want to do? So this explores the habits that dictates the opportunities that are actually available in a place where you deliver your services. So you may have a range of services for folks, but can they actually take advantage of those services? So we already talked about maybe someone may want to access your service, but there are barriers in place because they need to fill out an online form. But what if that person doesn't have a computer or a smartphone, or has literacy issues, or feels intimidated because it's English as a second language? So they may have the choice to access your service with team members, and they may be willing, and this space may be willing and welcoming, but if they can't fill out the form, then the actual opportunity to participate doesn't actually exist. So again, we see this in terms of structural barriers for folks. It's important to examine how all these pieces fit together. I see a couple comments in the chat. Okay, thank you. Thanks for joining us. No jargon or acronyms for people. Yes, and I have to say I am guilty of that. So if anything has popped up that you're not familiar with, please let me know. But it's a downfall of most agencies and organizations that we love our acronyms. So we're just going to wrap this up over the next minute or two. These are some guiding questions that I think are helpful in terms of how you may want to look at your service or your programs. You know, how do community members get information about the services you provide? Is it online, paper pamphlets, physical office location? Are services delivered across the area? Have you considered the diverse needs of communities, urban, remote, rural? What is your system for responding to client requests? Is it referral based? Does everybody understand the referral process? What languages are your services offered in? You know, here in Western Canada, English is the default, but that's not necessarily suitable for all communities and spaces that you're working in. Is the language accessible to a variety of reading levels? Do you collect data on who accesses your services and why? Does an analysis of the data show any trends that you need to be mindful of? Are there particular populations not accessing your services that may be facing unintended barriers? What service organizations hold relationships, if any, with these groups? Again, it's that relationship building and really getting to know who's on the ground. And so this is a good practice checklist for disaster risk reduction. I'm not going to read through this, but I'll provide a printout that Sarah can share out. It's quite in depth, so I'm just going to go. Hopefully I don't make anybody dizzy. I'm just going to quickly go screen over because there's about 5 of these. There's quite a bit. This has been adapted from the World Bank and IFRC, and so that'll be made available. And these are just some additional resources that I think may be helpful for folks who are wanting to explore the topic of GBA plus a little bit more in depth and looking at diversity and inclusion. So the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, great number of resources, newly released glossary, and I think there's a number of toolkits that you can access. The Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women, again, has toolkits on intersectionality, works in partnership with the Native Women's Association of Canada, does some really solid Canadian-based research that if you're so inclined and you like that stuff, that's a good way to go. There is an excellent summary report from Climate Change, Intersectionality, and GBA Plus in British Columbia. It's a really great example of looking at disaster management and GBA Plus in practice. So if you get a chance, and it's very easy, it's an easy read. If you get an opportunity, I would encourage you to click on that link and take a look at that summary report. Of course, Elaine Anderson, she's my idol. She is really the sort of the founding person looking at gender and disaster. I think some of her work started in 1997 around the Red River Valley floods. And Laurie Peake is amazing. Alice Ruthergill, they're all amazing academics. And this is the latest version of Gender and Disaster, and it has a lot of great content for folks to consider if again that's sort of your jam and you like to look at that type of material. We have the unconscious or implicit bias test from Harvard. I would encourage folks to take a look at this. You may not know what your own biases are, and it's very eye-opening because if you hold some bias and you are helping to design programs or services, you may inadvertently be creating barriers that you're not even aware of. So I think it's something to check out. Just go take a look. It doesn't take too long, but there's a number of tests that you can do, and it's confidential, it's anonymous, so nobody will see what you have to do. Native Women's Association of Canada, they have great resources around emergency management priorities for Indigenous women. Also a lot of great content around murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. I think that's an important piece that we need to look at as well. So if you haven't explored that site, I encourage you to do so. Sarah mentioned already, the Women and Gender Equity Canada WAGE is the federal department, and they have the Intro to GBA Plus course. It says 2.5 hours. Honestly, I would say it's probably more like 3.5 hours to kind of go through that material. So, you may want to start with that, and then if I haven't bored you to tears, you may want to rewatch this session as it's being recorded, and sort of like layer some of that learning. And then, of course, if you just do a search on gender and disaster management courses, World Bank, UN, Oxfam, there's loads of free courses that are available around gender and disaster management and how to kind of tie those pieces together. I see there. Okay, great. Comment about the resources. Awesome. I'm just going to skip through this. These are just references. So if anyone's interested, again, I'll share that with Sarah. And then, yeah, I think we're at our question time. I did go a little bit over, so thank you. But yeah, I'll stop if anyone has any comments or questions.
It's Guy again, sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
This is making me think of all kinds of things. It's interesting. I was just reflecting on the collaborative, which is, I describe the collaborative as an outreach to special populations, right? But it's interesting, the gender piece, it's happening maybe organically, but this makes me think, are we missing a lens of looking more on the gender aspects of the special populations? I mean, we know who's getting health information, for example. We assume, I guess. So it's just interesting. It just makes me think of that. So I think we have the right mix of people, but we just need a certain lens that would like put the cherry on the cake, so to speak. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if it's not specified in a policy or sort of service delivery plan, there's a likelihood it may be missed. And same with budget considerations. If it's not in the budget, it tends not to happen. So if we could really make gender equity or intersectionality a focal point and just give it the weight that it deserves, we're more likely to have dedicated resources to be able to do some of the work around it. Leaving it to chance can be a bit risky because there's just so many competing priorities. And, we're in this time of COVID and folks are tired and there's a lot of stuff going on. So if we can, and you're able to, I think if you can make it very specific that the GBA plus or intersectionality, gender equity needs to be included, then I think it's just better for everybody overall. Yeah, Sherry, please go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for all the information and all the resources and references. It's so amazing. There's something you mentioned a little bit earlier, like kind of at the start of the session about how during disasters, the violence against some of these more marginalized people increases. And do we have more information about like the root cause of that or why that happens?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So the root cause of gender-based violence is inequity. That's really what's driving it. It's women and girls' lower status in society. And what we're seeing is that disaster is not a cause for increased disaster, but it almost creates this space, this sort of allowance for violence to occur. There's a lot of change, there's a lot of turmoil, and that's sort of kind of the trigger around allowing violence to take place. And so there is ongoing research. I think, I'm not sure when, I think maybe in spring, Jean Slick from Railroads University, I've been working with her, part of a Canadian Women's Foundation. There's some research around that will kind of point to it, but it's still an unknown. We don't really understand why in times of disaster we see violence other than that there's stress triggers, there is an increase in substance abuse, and really because other things are going on, there's sort of this this space for violence to happen because no one's really keeping an eye on it. And studies have shown, I think it was in Australia with the bushfires, when gender-based violence was occurring, people tended to kind of just like turn away from it because like, oh, people are under stress. It's not a normal thing that, you know, so-and-so does. He didn't mean it. And so it's almost becomes sort of excusable because it wasn't this ongoing thing. But we know gender-based violence exists everywhere. It's happening all the time. And then in times of disaster, women and girls are particularly susceptible. So we need to have that. We know that it happens. We don't need additional research, but we need to be accounting for it in all our programs and services. And COVID, again, really has brought that to light in very shocking ways, because before you can say, oh, it's a disaster, it's isolated to this particular group or this particular population, but COVID is a global pandemic, and we're seeing this around the world, and people are recognizing, oh, gender-based violence is a bigger problem than we thought, and it needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Any other? I'm just going to take a look at the chat here. Displaced interim housing during disasters is very concerning for women and girls, aging adults, and gender-based violence. Yes, housing insecurity is a big problem. Folks that are experiencing gender-based violence and don't have, you know, they're financially insecure. Housing, I don't know where you're living, but here in BC, in all parts of the province, the housing market is really difficult. And so people are forced to make very difficult decisions around staying with their abuser or staying in an unsafe place because they're not able to have secure housing. And then we have folks that are who are living on the streets or who are in transitional housing. And again, those are not safe spaces. So there's a lot of dynamics around these pieces, and how do we address that? And folks who maybe don't have secure housing, how do we hear their voices if they're kind of going through transitional shelters or they're on the street? And, you know, again, it's important to tap into those organizations that work with special populations, disadvantaged populations, to really understand what's happening. But we need more resources to support folks in times of disaster. And yeah. Yeah, Jean Sick is great. She was a professor of mine at Royal Roads, and I think she worked previously with Red Cross, I think back in the day as well. We've all got some Red Cross connections one way or another. Yeah, so she's fabulous and doing a lot of great work as well. Yeah, any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Alex, I just had a really quick question, and I think I ask this about once a year, but is there any Canadian community of practice that's kind of evolving that maybe you can connect us with? Because I feel like that's what it'll take for this to become even more integrated into our EM practice. It's sort of like a coalition approach. But.
Yeah, there was sort of this North American gender disaster group, but it kind of petered out and hasn't been overly active. I participated for a few years, and then I think it's a bit defunct. I haven't checked back in the last couple of years because there just hasn't been much happening. I know with COVID, there's sort of this North American group with a number of practitioners and academics and so on that are doing work and kind of sharing out the information. I'll take a look at that because there's some Canadian content tied into that, but I haven't come across a specific like pan-Canadian community of practice. I think this is just, happening, in spots in government or with some organizations. I don't know, maybe, I don't know if Red Cross has something like that, but I haven't seen anything nationwide. I'm hoping it will increase as the conversation around diversity and inclusion also increases. I mean, now we're seeing equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's shifting and morphing. And I think as more people gain awareness and there's more demand for information, community of practice will develop. But to my knowledge at this time, I'm not aware of it. So if there is, and you know of it, please let us know. If somebody wants to start one, then there's an appetite for it. But I'm sure that everyone is probably already overwhelmed with their work. But yeah, it would be a great resource to kind of tap in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, keep me in mind if something springs up, because I'd love to get on board that train.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know actually if the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women has something like, everybody has a little groups. There's, even the Gender-Based Violence Area of Responsibility has sort of this call that it's an international body that has calls once a month, and anybody can basically join around that, but it focuses on gender-based violence. So there's, again, like these different pockets, but I don't think there's anything that's like really like this fulsome approach around intersectional analysis and gender yet.
Mm-hmm. I see more of it within the Red Cross. It's as there's more sort of cross currents with international work and domestic work, I see more of it happening. And then, like I said, like it's a requirement now in a lot of federal grants and things like that. So it's happening. It's building.
Yeah. Well, I think National had a gender equity advisor for some time there. I had then left Red Cross and went on to Doctors Without Borders, so I'm not sure what's happened, but I think again it just shows sort of that growth that's taken place and the interest and the recognition of having this intersectional approach and looking at these considerations, which we kind of thought maybe we didn't need to, or were kind of happening, but I think we need to be very direct and meaningful in our approach. Yeah, and then a few dynamic mayors are also leading, but again, so many priorities. Yeah, very much so. I think even Toronto, one of the mayoral candidates was running on a platform around gender-based analysis plus or gender equity. So it's picking up, maybe not as quickly as we'd like to. It's a bit of a slow-moving beast, but I think the more that we can talk about it and share the information, the more it becomes more salient in our work. See, internationally, if you go into any international organization, you talk about gender analysis or gender mainstreaming, right, people are aware it's a skill set that you need to work in the international development context or international humanitarian context. So domestically, we're a little bit behind there.
So any final questions for Alex?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah. So what I will say is I always like to leave my sessions with kind of this learning journey, because I believe that we're all on this learning journey and there's just so much more that we can gain from this. So feel free. I always encourage you. This is not to be shared out, but if you're looking at like what's something I can do, this is a bit of a prompt around either personal reflection from the session and action that you can take or things that you might be curious about. And hopefully that'll help carry you through to the next stage and encourage you to delve into the topic a little bit more.
So Alex, thank you so much for giving your time today. I just want to say that you've got all of our brains busy and I think there's more to come on this for sure. So but yeah, really grateful for sharing your wisdom and experience in this area today. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Shauna to conclude the day's session.
Yes, it was very informative. Thank you. And thank you for everybody who participated today. I will be sending out a very short evaluation later this afternoon that should get sent to your email. If you could please take a little bit of time to fill that out. We would really appreciate your feedback. Our next session, I believe, and Sarah, could you just remind me for session number 5, the date?
It's March 10th, I believe.
March 10th. Yeah, we'll be having session number 5 and we really hope to see you guys there. I will be sending out an email about that as well. So yeah, stay tuned. Thanks
everyone. And don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to continue the conversation, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.